The LA Kings try to close out their best stretch of the season with a big win this weekend, and it's a Kings Fan Feedback Friday on this episode of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. You can enjoy the NFL season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is a Kings Fan Feedback Friday, and we've got a lot of emails to get to, but real quick, the Kings are about to wrap up a stretch of 7 of 9 games at home this Saturday. It's been a terrific run for the Kings so far, going 6-2 over the 8 games so far. The final game, though, will be against, just the team with the most points in the NHL going into the weekend, the Minnesota Wild. They've been stunningly good this season, leading the NHL with 40 points after a 5-1 win over the Ducks in Anaheim on Friday night. They are led by MVP candidate Kirill Kaprizov, who leads the NHL in points with 42, and they have a Vezina caliber goaltender in net so far this season. Philip Gustafsson leads the NHL in save percentage and goals against average. Needless to say, if the Kings can win this game and finish up this stretch 7-2, it will have been an amazing run, and we will look back at this point of the season probably being one of the most important of the year. So big game coming up on Saturday. Looking forward to that one. It is a Kings Fan Feedback Friday show, so let's get right to your emails. And our first comes from Jim in Lakewood, and he says, I think the Kings have another defenseman to make a decision on come the trade deadline. This one has a big price tag, but going home to Toronto would be a cool thing for him. Wish him all the best, but the kids and the folks they brought in have got it from here. Oh, and you can ask Mr. Quick if anyone thinks he was too big to go. He was not. I think also the $1 million goalie is doing a fine job. The $5 million goalie, not so much. I think paying goalies less makes more sense. Look at the guys who get a lot and flame out and are just inconsistent. Too many to count in the league. Not Mr. Dave. Love that dude. And again, that was from Jim in Lakewood. Well, let's start with the goalie opinion that he had. I am in that camp that does not want to pay a lot for a goaltender. Even though it is an incredibly important position, we've seen plenty of examples of teams winning the Stanley Cup with less than excellent goaltending, less than, the highest caliber goalies. Matt Murray, Braden Holtby, Darcy Kemper, Aiden Hill. These are all Stanley Cup winning goalies over the past 10 years, and none of these guys are elite. None of these guys won Vezina trophies. So I would tend to agree with Jim. I think if you've got a great team, you can win with a good goalie or even a very good goalie. You don't have to have an elite goalie to win a Stanley Cup. Now, if you didn't get what he was talking about, he said the Kings have a decision to make about a defenseman. He was talking about Drew Doughty, and alluding to the fact that maybe the Kings could trade Drew Doughty to Toronto. Been a lot of chatter about possible trades involving the Maple Leafs. And Mitch Marner is a marquee player that Toronto has. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. Toronto obviously is looking to win an elusive Stanley Cup, maybe getting a veteran defenseman who's won cups and is a great leader could be a missing piece. The Kings would have to give up something big as well, maybe a player like Quentin Byfield. Would Quentin Byfield and Drew Doughty be enough to go to Toronto to get Mitch Marner to come to LA? It's certainly an intriguing and fun thing to think about, but some issues with it. Drew is making $11 million. The Kings would have to pay Marner $13 to $14 million because he's going to be a UFA, and that's what he's going to command on the market. And both Mitch Marner and Drew Doughty have full no movement clauses. They control where they want to go. So I could see Doughty wanting to go back home to Toronto and try and get one more cup before the end of his career. That's probably the only place I could see him saying, okay, I'll go there. And for Mitch Marner, does he want to come to LA and kind of be the marquee guy or one of the marquee guys here? And he's already got that in Toronto. And it certainly seems like he likes playing there, despite it being a fishbowl and all the pressures that are there. So I don't see it happening. Unfortunately, I would like to see it happen, even though Marner, frankly, he's not a proven playoff, caliber type guy. But I think the Kings are kind of in position. They'd love to take a chance on somebody like that who's really skilled and on the younger side of things. Of course, we know what the fan reaction was when Jonathan Quick got traded. So seeing Drew Doughty go, the greatest defenseman in franchise history, would certainly not sit well with a lot of fans. But I don't know. A lot of people have tossed out some trade ideas. I actually don't think that one is quite as crazy as some of the ones I've heard, although I don't see it happening. It would be a huge deal. That would be something, but no, I don't see that happening. And I know the Jim's point is that the Kings have been okay without Drew Doughty, and they have. It's true. Brian in Los Alamitos checks in. He says, do you think the Kings made a mistake by playing Byfield at wing to start his NHL career? Now, by moving him to center after 2 seasons at wing, he has to relearn the center position, and it feels like he's starting all over. It just seems like the time QB spent learning how to play wing could have been spent learning to play center, and maybe he would have been close to ready to take over for Kopitar by now. Instead, it appears as his development has hit another delay. Sometimes I think the Kings are overly cautious when it comes to developing their prospects. So I don't think it's fair to say that Quinton Byfield playing wing for a couple of seasons has caused him to have to relearn the position. He's played center his whole life until those 2 years. So I don't think it's that dramatic. I think he has to learn to play center at the NHL level, but kind of having to learn how to play the position again, I think it's a little bit much. But certainly the Kings, I don't think they're at a crossroads with Quinton Byfield at this point. I still think it would take another season of what he's doing now for them to really say, okay, forget about what our plan is for him to be eventually the number one center. We've got to get something out of this player that we've invested in, not only in where he was drafted, but the money they're now paying him. So, but I don't think that time's now. I think they're willing to write it out at this point. The team is playing okay with him not playing okay at the center position. And as I've said, there's still time and room for him to get better as the season goes along. We're keeping our fingers crossed that happens. But I don't think that it's him playing wing has, stunted his growth, so to speak. If he doesn't turn it around at some point this year, I could see them switching him back to wing just to try and get some production out of him as we go down the stretch. I think that's certainly possible, but I think eventually, even if that were to happen, I still think the Kings' plans going forward are for Quinton Byfield to be a center for years to come for them at the NHL level. The Cruises from Atwater Village have checked in, and they said, what a fantastic game it was to watch the Kings beat the Stars. I know the first period looked bad, being down 2 goals, but the way they fought back to win it, someone must have brought some coffee and tea to the team after the first period to wake them up. One thing I noticed is that you didn't mention that you can watch the Kings games on Victory Plus. I was able to watch the Kings versus the Stars for free. I also watched the Kings versus the Ducks. I really hope that Victory Plus can pick up the Kings, since it's nice to watch them for free on that service. What's your opinions on this? Last thing, could someone tell Gavrikov his phone is ringing? The Kings really need to keep him. He's a great defenseman for holding down the fort while Drew has been out. Seems to pair up with anyone. Seems to pair up with any other defenseman on the team. And again, that was from the Cruises in Atwater Village. Yes, you were able to watch the Kings on Victory Plus, which is a free streaming service, against the Ducks and the Stars. But that's because the Ducks and the Stars have all their games streamed on Victory Plus. That's the only time you'll be able to see the Kings on that channel, is when they play one of those two teams. So I would love to see the Kings eventually go to Victory Plus and make their games free, available to everyone. That would be a great service to their fans. And just for me personally, I wouldn't have to pay for DirecTV sports channel anymore, sports package, because the only reason I have it is to watch the Kings games. I don't watch it any other time. So it would save their fans money, and that would be great. I'd love to see it happen. As for Gavrikov, he certainly has shown how important of a player he can be. I personally think, kind of like what Jim was talking about, how the Kings have shown they can play without Doughty. I think when Drew Doughty comes back, Gavrikov goes back to the second pairing, and I think going forward, the Kings will have Anderson and Doughty for next year. They'll have Edmondson and Clark for next year. They'll have Spence and Moverara for next year. Those guys are all signed for next year. I think if that was the Kings forwards defensive pairings for next season, it's still pretty good. Now, would it be better with Gavrikov? Yes, but they have to invest that money in him. And I think that money could be spent probably better elsewhere. So we'll see what happens. I'm not going to cry if they re-sign Gavrikov, but I could see the Kings trading him at the deadline for things that can help the Kings down the road. We shall see. But he's certainly helped himself out individually for what he's going to get paid in his next contract. More emails coming up next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. And when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The Chargers are at the Chiefs, with LA getting 3.5 points on the road Sunday night. Over under is 42.5. The Rams host the Bills. LA is a 3.5 point home underdog. Over under in that one is 49.5. Just visit FanDuel.com and join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, back to your emails. This comes from Scott in Vegas. He says, for once, I'm not going to complain about the team. Instead, I'm going to give them props for a move I knew was a good one. I'm talking about Warren Foegele versus Victor Arvidsson. I knew when Arvidsson signed with the Oilers, it would end up being a disaster. Here we are 25 games in, and he's hurt again, and he has 5 points as an Oiler. Big shock. It's a lower body injury. On the flip side, we pick up a gritty Foegele who has 13 points and has played every game. It's just fun to watch the Oilers deal with this for a change. Looking back at those playoff series, Arvidsson really hurt us against the Oilers with his questionable status game to game. If, God forbid, we end up playing the Oilers in the playoffs again, at least this little matchup will favor us for once. Great win against Dallas. Let's keep it rolling. And that was from Scott in Vegas. So far, you're right, Scott. It has been a good decision for the Kings. Now, they weren't traded for each other, but Arvidsson left the Kings, goes to the Oilers, and Foegele leaves the Oilers and comes to the Kings. So you could see why he's making the comparison. And that's what I said at the end of last season. I like Victor Arvidsson. I like his feistiness. I like his skill. He's a spark plug type of a guy, but you can't rely on him because he has an injury history, and so far that has affected him so far. But we'll see at the end of the year where it goes and how it ends up. But so far, so good. That decision for Rob Blake and the LA Kings. Will in Oxnard checks in, says he's an everydayer. Thank you, Will. He says, here's my perspective in regard to the line changes. I love them. Playing with new line mates may force you to play the system more than playing your line mates' tendencies. This could be an interesting approach, forcing players to learn a new system. Switching up the lines consistently also allows the coaching staff to reward those that produce, and I believe is a great mentality to have for a team. Produce, and you'll get minutes. This also may spill over into the 11-7 setup. If 7 defensemen are making a difference, then play 7 of them. Or inversely, if only 11 forwards are making a difference, then just play 11 of them. As evident from last season, using 11 forwards is not a handicap in any way. The mindset of earning your minutes, and importantly, anyone can earn minutes by playing well, is a mindset that can go a long way. Mixing and matching lines could also reveal combinations that could work better than expected, potentially creating a better depth and overall a better team. Lastly, it does make it harder on the opposition's teams to match up, which is a plus. I'm excited to see what Drew does when he returns. Defense are more active in this new system, and apparent by their play and point production, Drew should be a huge asset when he returns. Fun prediction. Who do you think is on the final team heading into the postseason? Aside from all the big names, I think that Movarar eclipses Spence, and Sammy slides in the fourth line with Lewis and Jeannot, even though he didn't look strong against Dallas. Artie is a wild card since we haven't seen him play this season. A lot of topics there, a lot of thoughts there from Will in Oxnard. I like the points you made, Will, about the lines. I don't know, though, if I've seen Hiller really reward players by moving them around on a line. For example, Warren Fogle had a great game in the last game for the Kings against Dallas. I don't think he'll be moved up to the top line to play with Kopitar and Kempe against Minnesota. That would be an example of Jim Hiller moving lines around, rewarding players. He doesn't do that too much. He, like I said, I like a lot of your points about some of the things as far as moving the lines around, and I don't really have an issue with it as well. But I don't know that I see him do that particular thing too much. So we'll see if that changes. By the way, if Warren Fogle plays on the top line against Minnesota, then I will stand corrected. We've seen Gavrikov play on his offside as well and do well, but I don't know if Jacob Movarar could do that. I don't know. I would say as it stands right now, I think when Doughty comes back, I think Movarar is probably the odd man out. And I don't see Samuel Hellenius getting into the playoffs. Just, young guys in the postseason, you don't do that unless you really have to. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised to see Trevor Lewis centering the line with Tanner Jeannot and who knows who else could be there, but we'll see. Up next, we've got Peter in Vail, Colorado, and he says, have you noticed how many journeyman goaltenders turn into much better versions of themselves on the Kings? You can go back to Peter Budaj, Phoenix Copley, Cam Talbot, and now David Riddick. My purpose is not to denigrate these goalies, but I think the Kings adjust their play to protect these average netminders at great sacrifice to their offense. When Jonathan Quick was in his prime, the team knew that he would make the necessary saves most of the time, so they took more offensive risks and were a much more dangerous team. On a related note, while the Kings have been decent at drafting players, they have been very poor at developing game-breaking offensive talents. The last homegrown bona fide offensive threat was Adrian Kempe, drafted in 2014. You cannot use the number 2 overall pick Byfield and the number 5 overall pick Turcotte and draft forwards and not come up with a 30-plus goal, 70-plus point player. This inability to develop offensive players makes it inexplicable that the Kings let Tyler Toffoli get away. The Kings seem to want to take every player and turn him into a defensive drone. In my opinion, the mismanagement of the development of Arthur Kaliev illustrates my point. He's a shooter. Don't try to make him something he's not. Play him with a reasonable center if you have to, but send him out there to be a scorer. Similarly, every time I see Turcotte, who's undersized but seems to have playmaking flair on the fourth line, I cringe. We have to see what these players can do in roles that match their skill set. The Kings are not going to win the Stanley Cup this year, so we need to see what we have in all these young players. Turcotte, Byfield, Hagemo, Kaliev. They are all at a point where they need either NHL players or where they're either NHL players or they're not. Give them a chance in roles that match their skill, and if they can't do the job they were drafted for, move on. Terrific show. Keep up the good work. And that was from Peter in Vail, Colorado. Good points. I think the Kings win with good enough goaltending because the Kings are a solid defensive team. And sure, if you have an elite goalie, you can afford to be more aggressive at times, but the Kings have never been a run and gun team. I mean, even when Jonathan Quick was in his prime, they were still a defensive minded team. So I don't know that, the Kings have somehow taken their foot off the gas or changed their style of play because of the type of goaltenders they've had in recent years. Like I said, they've always been a great defensive team. As far as you talked about Byfield and Turcotte, I think it's still too early to pass judgment on Quentin Byfield. Um, Even if he has a bad year, I still think he's got another year to show what he can be or not. And as for Turcotte, I mean, it's hard to develop a guy when he's hurt all the time. I mean, he's been healthy of late for the most part, and we've seen a guy that can certainly play at the NHL level. And like I've said, there have been times when I've said I'd like to see him in a more prominent position in the lineup, but as of late, like Tanner Jeannot has played great lately. If he can keep that going, then Turcotte, as a younger guy who's still kind of learning his way, is going to probably have to play on the bottom six. But if Jeannot doesn't keep this up, then I could certainly see Alex Turcotte getting top 6 minutes playing on the wing on that second line on the Byfield line. As for Kaliev and Pogimo, I mean, yeah, those are guys that can score, but they don't do much else. And you can't just throw guys out there who have good shots, but are liabilities and everything else. That just doesn't work. Now maybe you can put up with that if they're going to score 40 or more. You'll put up with it, but they're not going to. Those guys are not going to do that. So, I don't think Kaliev was developed improperly. I just think, he was one of those guys who had put up spectacular numbers at the lower levels, but his game just doesn't really translate to the NHL level. At least that's my opinion. We still got some more emails to read for you. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. We are so lucky, those of us that live in the LA area, we have the opportunity to go to so many live events, sports, yes, but also you've got theater events, comedy shows, and concerts, and Gametime has the tickets to whatever it is you're into. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets even easier, and you can save more. The feature shows you the total up front, no surprise fees to check out. You can get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy it in the app. You get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. The LA Galaxy are playing in the MLS Cup final on Saturday, and you can get tickets on Gametime for less than $200 for the final, for the championship. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's squeeze in these last few emails. We've got Ed in Brea checking in. He says, just want to address the goalie situation. When Eric Portillo got sent to Ontario again, in my opinion, I think it was the wrong move. I get Kemper's making over $5 million, and the Kings have to pay him for business reasons. And Kemper, I believe, is just a backup. Rittich is just a backup. That game in Anaheim showed me Portillo's NHL ready. His ability to move, his size, capable of making high saves, goals expected, and get the Kings more points. At 24, Jonathan Quick started his career at the same point with the Kings. I'm not saying that Portillo is quick. However, he may have the potential to be that guy. On a side note, credit to head coach Jim Hiller establishing the team's identity, it seems. Defense first, puck control, top 5 in shots allowed. The structure of the 1-2-2 is starting to gel. And that is from Ed in Brea. Now, Ed, I know you're a goalie, but I think you're being a little presumptuous to think that after one NHL start against the Ducks, that has proven that Eric Portillo is NHL ready. He had a very nice game. He does have great size. He looked good, but I got to see a lot more than one game to say he should be our backup full-time or, be one of the two goalies for the LA Kings. I don't see that yet. I think Darcy Kemper, has played well when he's been healthy, and obviously David Rittich has filled in admirably and certainly has been unbelievable at home. But I don't think Eric Portillo is ready, so I would disagree with you on that. Luke checks in. He's from Parts Unknown. He says, "Hey Eddie, I'm relatively new to the podcast, but I'm enjoying it. I like where the Kings are right now in the standings. I don't think we need to pass Vegas to have a nice Stanley Cup run. One step one is eliminating the Oilers in the first round. What do you think it'll take to beat Edmonton with McDavid and Draisaitl? With Fiala and Byfield heating up, I think it possibly helps us power past them to continue our run." And again, that was from Luke. We don't know where he's from. Hopefully Luke will email us and let us know where he's at the next time. I've said it before, Fiala and Byfield getting going and being consistent producers is a huge factor in the Kings doing something in the postseason. To me, those guys have to be important players and impact players for the Kings. So there's still a lot of time for them to get it going, but so far that's a concern. But we'll see. I would say about the Oilers, and again, it's still relatively early. We're not even in the new year yet. They kind of seem to have kind of regressed back to the old Oilers team where they had McDavid and Draisaitl, but everybody else was not very good. And that's kind of what they're going through right now. Those two guys are still producing, but Zach Hyman isn't the player he was last year. The goaltending, which was okay last year, has definitely regressed. They're just not, they got the two horses, but everything else around them is not great. And that's where they were, a few years back. Before last year, they kind of put it all together and made a run to the Cup. Our final email comes from Brian in Tampa, Florida. He says, just wanted to mention that Kings' recent first-round pick, Liam Greentree, is having a great season in the OHL so far. He's now 4th in points in the Ontario Hockey League, 44 points in 26 games. He's a plus 18 captain of the Windsor Spitfires. He had been on the second worst team in the OHL last year, but this year they're 19-6, so the second best record this season. Go Kings, go. So Brian checking in with an update on Liam Greentree. Thank you for that, Brian. I was unaware he was doing that well. We are going to have some time coming up. Christmas week, the Kings are off for the whole week. So we'll have some time to devote to checking in on some other things, and I think that would be a good time to check in on Liam Greentree and the rest of the Kings prospects, whether they're in college or playing in juniors, and kind of give you an update on where everyone is at that point of the year. Thank you to everyone who took the time to email. This show is literally not possible without your participation. So thank you so much. Don't forget Kings Wild Saturday, 5 p.m. LA time. Game will be televised locally on the FanDuel Sports Network, also nationally on ESPN Plus, and you can hear it on the 710 ESPN app. I will not be out at the game. If anyone wanted to meet up and say hi, I'll be at a holiday party on Friday, but I will definitely be keeping an eye on that game and look forward to talking about it on next week's show on Monday. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up next week on Monday, we will recap that big Kings Wild game as LA heads out east for a road trip. Tuesday, we're going to recap the Kings Islanders game that day and then record our show right afterwards. So we'll have the react to the Kings Islanders game. And then the next day, we'll preview Kings Devils. And then the following day, Thursday, recap that game right after it concludes over in the East Coast. So it'll be an early wrap up. And then, of course, next Friday, we'll do this again. We'll have another Kings fan feedback show. If you want to get an email in for that, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. If you're watching on YouTube, you can always leave your comments in the comments section. We appreciate that. Would love for you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. And as always, go Kings, go.